All right. You guys win. You guys win. You wanted some more Dynasty lessons learned. I heard you guys in the comment section, but we're going to do a little bit of a compromise. Instead of going game by game and giving you one lesson learned from every single game and one player at each team, I'm going to do just my top 4 Dynasty lessons learned from week 4. And this will be kind of because some of the games are boring. Some of the teams are boring. We know the trends. We know what some of these players are. We know what some of their teams' identities are. Some of the games are just really boring to talk about. So instead, I picked my 4 biggest Dynasty lessons learned from this past week. And then this will hopefully be the continuing series moving on throughout the rest of the season. So starting first with Jayden Daniels. 25 fantasy points in week 4. He had 233 passing yards and a touchdown, then had almost 50 rushing yards and a touchdown. He is the QB1 overall in fantasy right now, QB2 in points per game behind Jordan Love. The start to the season is absolutely insane for Jayden Daniels. It's been more than what I projected him to be. I was already a massive fan of Jayden Daniels for 2024. He was a big redraft guy for me that I propped up as having like a breakout year already in year 1. A guy that I believe was going to outscore Caleb Williams just because of the rushing ability that he had. This has been more than what I even projected. The passing numbers over the past 2 weeks have been really strong to look at. He's had 3 games now, 25 fantasy points or more, 3 games of 225 plus passing yards, 39 plus rushing yards in all 4 games. He couldn't hit 40 just to make that a clean 40, but 39 plus in all 4 games, has 3 passing touchdowns to 1 interception through 4 weeks. It's just been absolutely amazing. I think as of right now, Jayden Daniels is my QB3 in Dynasty. It is Josh Allen, it is Lamar Jackson, then it is Jayden Daniels. He's ahead of Jalen Hurts, he's ahead of CJ Stroud, he's ahead of Patrick Mahomes, he's ahead of Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, all of those guys. And I was talking to Caleb Nemi yesterday, and he said that Daniels is probably his QB2 behind only Josh Allen, ahead of Lamar. Not necessarily there yet. I think I like Lamar's body of work a little bit more. I trust the history with him a little bit, but they're very, very close. I think the way that I would actually do it tier wise would be Josh Allen would be QB1 in a tier of his own. And then tier 2 would be Lamar and Jayden Daniels. And then maybe you could throw in like Jalen Hurts in there too, when AJ Brown and Devonta Smith are both fully healthy, of course. But Daniels has been absolutely insane. And if this is the start to his career, just imagine the ceiling. Imagine if they actually draft a wide receiver in round 1 next year, or they add a guy in free agency. Imagine if they go out and they sign T. Higgins next offseason. If they draft a guy, they probably won't get Luther Burden or Ted McMillan because they're probably going to make the playoffs. They're going to win the NFC East, at least with the way that they're playing right now. So they probably won't be in an area to draft the top 2 guys, but they could maybe draft Amika Egbuka out of Ohio State. They maybe could draft Evan Stewart out of Oregon. Is that his name? Stewart out of Oregon. I'm not in the college mode yet, so I can't necessarily remember the names off the top of my head. But if they draft a wide receiver like that next year, or like I said, like add a T. Higgins or somebody, then Daniels, I mean, it's going to be Stephon Diggs with Josh Allen, AJ Brown with Jalen Hurts. It's going to be, all of that kind of stuff with Jayden Daniels in year 2. Marvin Harrison or DeAndre Hopkins with Kyler Murray, that kind of thing for Jayden Daniels. And he would be, it's going to be so phenomenal to watch. I have the advice is buy, because I'm not selling him. I guess he's more of a hold, more or less. If you already drafted him, you're not selling him. If you didn't draft him, you're probably not going to be able to buy him. I would love to buy him. I would love to flip, like I said, CJ Stroud for Jayden Daniels, or Kyler Murray for Jayden Daniels, or Patrick Mahomes for Jalen Daniels. But at this point, I think whoever has Daniels is just going to hold on tight, and I do not blame them. He is a phenomenal top 3 dynasty quarterback. Now, keeping with the Washington Commanders, probably the biggest beneficiary of the improved Commanders offense has been Brian Robinson. He had 20 fantasy points in week 4, 100 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, 3 receptions for 12 yards. This is his second 100 plus rushing yard game on the year out of the 4 games. So 50% of his games so far, 100 plus rushing yards. He has 89 plus total yards in 3 out of 4 games. He scored a touchdown in 3 out of 4 games. He has a 10% target share right now too. That is with Austin Eckler for 3 out of the 4 games, because Eckler was out this past week with a concussion. He is, I think, one of the best buys for running back needy contenders out there, because I don't think people still realize what Brian Robinson is doing. He's the RB14 in fantasy football right now. He is currently the better B Robinson. He is outproducing Bijan Robinson. So he's the better B Robinson, better B Rob for fantasy football at the running back position. He's a legitimate workhorse. He's had 16 plus touches every single week. The past 3 weeks, I think he's had 17 plus rush attempts themselves. So he's had 20 plus total touches with the, or 20 plus opportunities with 3 targets in 2 of the past 3 weeks. He's been absolutely insane. On Keep Trade Cut, he is the RB. My screen froze, so that's good. He is the RB 16 still on Keep Trade Cut, which I think is insane. I think that he is an excellent pivot option for contenders that lost Isaiah Pacheco. I would flip Pacheco for Brian Robinson straight up right now. I would flip Travis Etienne is ahead of Brian Robinson. I would make that swap. You got guys like Braylon Allen and Bucky Irving are 2 and 3 and 4 spots behind Brian Robinson. If you could add a second to either one of them, I would be doing that immediately. I just think that he is at the big one is going to be Christian McCaffrey for B-Rob plus. I think if it was Brian Robinson and a first for Christian McCaffrey, if you can make that deal happen as a contender, I would absolutely. I think that's the play as well. He just looks really, really good, and he's only into his 3rd year. He's still 25 years old. He's going to be on the Commanders next year. Possible that he re-signs then after that, or maybe they franchise tag him or something. So he could have another 2 years in this offense, maybe more. And I think that he's just a phenomenal buy right now as a high upside workhorse kind of a player. And I shouldn't say high upside, just a good upside, high floor, RB1 kind of a ceiling, a la like Antonio Gibson or Josh Jacobs a few years ago when they were just rushing all the time. They scored a bunch of touchdowns. They finished as like the RB9 or RB10 on the season. That I think is what Brian Robinson is. He doesn't have the ceiling to be a top 5 guy unless he gets a lot more receiving work. But as of where he stands right now, I think a back end RB1 is well within his range of outcomes. He's RB14 right now, so it's definitely in the range of outcomes. And I would be buying him as an RB needy contender if you can get him still. It's him and David Montgomery are like the 2 guys that I absolutely are in love with for their values if you need running backs. All right. Next on the list is DK Metcalf. Spoiler alert, all these players are buys right now just because week 4 was phenomenal. I just wanted to prop up some players rather than punch down on some other guys. So DK Metcalf, the 3rd player that I want to talk about today, another massive buy, 15 fantasy points in week 4, 17.4 fantasy points in week 4, unless he lost a fumble. 7 receptions for 100 yards on 12 targets, 3rd straight 100-yard game to start the year. I think that he personally has a case to be top 12 dynasty wide receiver again, because he was earlier in his career after like his wide receiver 5 year 2 finish in 2020. Then he kind of dropped down because he just had a couple like solid wide receiver 2 seasons. And then we got a big boost of a bunch of really good wide receiver talent. So it dropped him down into like the wide receiver 15 to 20 kind of range. I think that he has a case definitely to be back inside the top 12. He's wide receiver 13 on Keep Trade Cut, but he is still behind Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, both of whom I would take DK Metcalf over. So that props him up to being my wide receiver 11. Because I mean, he like if you look at 2025, he's going to be 27 years old next year. Maybe next year is finally the year where we don't get Tyler Lockett. Who knows? But this has nothing to do with Tyler Lockett himself, because DK Metcalf looks phenomenal. He is the alpha wide receiver 1 for this offense. He's been fantastic in this new Ryan Grubb offensive system. Geno Smith is kind of back, not necessarily to his 2022 form, but he's progressed and it looks better than what he did last year in 2023. He's entering the prime of his career. He has a huge track record of proven success. He's on the Seahawks with a good contract situation. So there's really nothing here for DK Metcalf that spells like insecurity or not a ton of confidence. It's just he is a guy that I'm willing to invest in right now, especially when we have still kind of question marks around Garrett Wilson, question marks around Chris Olave, question marks around Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, Jalen Waddle. Now Rashee Rice is hurt, unfortunately. So there's a lot of kind of flux in the kind of wide receiver 9 to wide receiver like 17 or 18 range, that they all kind of seem very, very similar in terms of, do you still want the younger upside? Do you want some of the proven production? I think Metcalf finds himself firmly in the middle where he's still young enough to be a good investment as a dynasty wide receiver one. And he's productive enough that you want him over some of the younger guys that maybe aren't as productive right now. So I think that he just fits right in the middle of that. And that's what makes him that's what makes me want to put him inside my top 12 again, if not even potentially even top 10, with how some of the other wide receivers kind of find themselves with the start of the 2024 season. So that's DK Metcalf. Looks absolutely fantastic this year, and I am buying him too. And it makes, I think, a great pivot option for a lot of dynasty contenders. If you have Tyreek Hill, how can you move over to DK Metcalf? If you lost Rashee Rice, how can you move over to DK Metcalf? If you're not necessarily sold on London Wilson Olave, how can you move to DK Metcalf? I think that is kind of the place that I want to go to, that he's one of the players that I want to go to at this higher level production range. Now we get to Rashee Rice. You guys were, I think, anticipating that maybe I was going to talk about Rashee Rice. Of course, I have to talk about Rashee Rice. Number one, this sucks. This is first and foremost, this is like the worst thing in the world. I hate every minute of this. I was literally in the grocery store because I watch football at Permanis, is like the local sports bar. I go watch football for the 1:00 games with my friends. Then I go grocery shopping for like half an hour. So I was in the store when I got the notification that Rashee Rice was down on the field. And I think I almost like dropped to my knees and just shouted no at the sky, like Homer Simpson style. Like that is just like, it was the worst thing ever. I have Michael Scott, this is the worst .gif on here, because this really is the worst. We still don't have news. Like, we don't have confirmation that he even tore his ACL. I've seen doctors on Twitter talk about that because of there's still no confirmation yet that it's possible that he has a partially torn ACL. And then they're going to talk through if he actually needs to have surgery now, if he can just kind of brace it and rehab it a little bit so that he can still possibly come back like later in the year. I think that's absolutely crazy. I've seen other people say that he tore his ACL, and then they're also trying to diagnose if there's further ligament damage to like his LCL or PCL or meniscus, a la like Javonte or J.K. Dobbins a couple years ago. So I think it's really weird for me now at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time on Wednesday that we still don't have confirmation what his actual knee injury is. And then we have to put in the potential suspension in 2025. It's I think it's weird. It's a weird place to try to value Rashee Rice right now. But I think what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to buy him everywhere. I would not be looking to sell him as a contender. He would not be one of the players that I would be looking to sell as a contender, because I still think that he's going to be fantastic, and he's still so young, and he proved to everybody that he is the wide receiver one for Patrick Mahomes. And next year will be year 3 on his rookie contract. So the situation is still fantastic. You just have to ride out the injury. And it's not like we haven't seen other young wide receivers come back from ACL injuries. Cooper Kupp tore his ACL, I think it was in year 3, then came back the following year, put up over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns, I think was the stat line. Keenan Allen tore his ACL very young in year 2 or 3. Following season, put up like 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. Like, it's not unheard of for wide receivers to come back immediately in year 1 after the ACL injury and still be almost as productive as what they were prior to the injury. And then, of course, there's year 2 after the ACL and all that kind of stuff like we see with running backs. But for wide receiver, I think it's an easier injury to come back from, assuming that it is just a clean torn ACL, or maybe it's a partially torn ACL that maybe gets surgically repaired and it's not as big of a recovery timeline. No idea. Not a doctor. Me just spitballing here. But because of all that, I would love to buy, even as a contender, if you don't have Rashee Rice and you could see this as an opportunity to buy a player like Rashee Rice cheap and take advantage of another contender's desperation, I would be doing that. I would sell Devontae Adams, sell Stephon Diggs, sell Mike Evans, pivot from the Olave, London, and Wilsons of the world. How can you, maybe trade Puka for Rashee Rice plus right now, because Puka's at least expected to come back in a couple of weeks. Rashee Rice at this moment is not expected to come back this year. How can you take advantage of somebody else's desperation as a contender, even if you yourself are a contender? I know that sounds weird, but I talked about that in the video that dropped earlier today. It sounds weird to do, but if you can do it, it definitely makes sense, especially to help you long term. Because I think it's easy to fill in some of these other little wide receivers to help. Like, if you have Wan'Dale Robinson and you could trade away Stephon Diggs in a second and go get Rashee Rice, massive win. Wan'Dale Robinson gives you the production. Rashee Rice gives you the high end upside, long term upside from a dynasty standpoint. I would just be loving to buy Rashee Rice. It's a shame because I feel like I already have him everywhere. I checked like every dynasty league I had him, and I already have him. So I can't really buy him, but that is absolutely what I would be loving to do with Rashee Rice right now. Whether you're rebuilding, contending, and if you had him as a contender, I would not be looking at him as the piece to sell off of. I would be trying to keep him and see what else I can do instead to fill in that production or fill in some of that production that Rashee Rice was giving you, not trading away him specifically. So that's at least how I view Rashee Rice right now. And then those are my big four. Daniels, Brian Robinson, DK Metcalf, Rashee Rice were my big four lessons learned or takeaways from this past week of football. I do have one bonus one for you. I wasn't going to talk about Trey Benson until I saw his keep trade cut ranking, which is kind of insane. He is the RB28 on KTC right now. I think that this offers a fantastic opportunity to buy low on Trey Benson, especially if he finds himself on a kind of contender team. If you think about where he was kind of in rookie drafts, he was in like the later firsts of one quarterback, maybe the early second of Superflex, but he was around that kind of 110 to 112 range in Superflex, 108 to 111 range in one quarterback leagues. So he might have went to a legitimate contender, like a team that just kind of took him just because he was the best player available. Maybe they were going to try and see if they could stash him for later on in 2025 and beyond. But we're in the thick of it now. It's week 4. He's the RB28 on keep trade cut. And if he's on a contender and they're kind of getting a little bit worried, maybe they lost Isaiah Pacheco, lost Christian McCaffrey. They haven't had Joe Mixon for a couple of weeks. If they have any of that kind of stuff going on and they're just looking for production now, they might view Trey Benson as a piece that is valuable enough to get them an actual legitimate player. So I'm looking at the names that are above Trey Benson on keep trade cut: Jordan Mason, J.K. Dobbins, Aaron Jones, Zach Charbonnet, James Conner, Ramondre Stevenson. If you have any of those guys and you're just kind of on the fringe of if you want to compete for this year or you're even not competing at all, those are all easy swaps. Just go trade Aaron Jones or Zach Charbonnet or J.K. Dobbins to the contender to give them points now. You get Trey Benson for the points later on down the road. Even a couple players behind him. Directly behind him is Tony Pollard, Chase Brown, Rashad White, Zach Moss, Najee Harris, Chuba Hubbard are some of the names that are like directly behind Trey Benson too. Maybe you have to add a third to them to get up to Trey Benson because of the age difference. But again, that team still gets the production. You get the possible upside and value for later on, maybe later on in the year, depending on if James Conner actually gets hurt. Knock on all the wood that I have that he doesn't actually get hurt. But for 2025 and beyond, assuming that James Conner's not there, Trey Benson as the workhorse in this Cardinals offense is probably a very, very valuable thing. He had 50 rushing yards this past week. It wasn't garbage time, but he looked good this past week in garbage time against the Commanders. And I expect him to look good if he were to actually get workhorse duties. So this is the time of year to make this kind of move. I didn't have this as the thing to talk about, but I just noticed that where his value was and thought I should mention Trey Benson here. If you could try to pull him away from a contender that is looking for points now, they might see Trey Benson as an expendable asset to get those kinds of points, and you should take advantage of that. So there we have it. 4 actual lessons learned, and then 1 bonus one. 5 lessons learned from week 4 heading into week 5 now. So like I said, this is hopefully kind of the new look for this kind of a series. Instead of going game by game, team by team, I'll just give you guys some of the big highlights and talk through all this stuff. So I appreciate you guys for loving this series. Hopefully this satisfies the itch a little bit to that point. Okay, of course, if you have any other questions about any other players, drop them down into the comment section and I will help you guys out with there in terms of directions with your team, trades, all that kind of stuff. Drop it down in the comment section. I appreciate and love each and every one of you. So I'm terrible at outros, so I'm just going to hit the end button and I will see you guys later on in the next video.